Welcome to Have You Heard, where we talk about issues at the intersection of agriculture and engineering. Let's get started. Here are your hosts, Morgan Hayes and Josh Jackson.
Welcome. This is the Have You Heard podcast. This is episode 49. We're going to talk a little bit today about management of trees on farm. We had some pretty wild weather last week that we sort of referred to in the podcast, and certainly tree cleanup has been on our minds this week. So we're going to talk a little bit about tree management, especially tree line, fence line management. But before we begin, I'm Morgan Hayes, an assistant professor in Biosystems and Ag Engineering here at the University of Kentucky, focusing on livestock facilities. In my personal life, I farm in Boyle County, Kentucky with my husband. We have a commercial cattle and hay operation.
I'm Josh Jackson, assistant professor in Biosystems and Agriculture and Engineering as well, where I focus on precision livestock. In my personal life, I focus on raising registered Angus cattle and some hay production.
Hey, Josh. So before we get into the trees, which is going to tie in very nicely because I know you're going to tell me you had to clean up some trees this week.
Yes.
Tell us what else has been happening on the farm.
So this weekend we had our lawnmower clinics that kept me fairly busy Saturday and part of Sunday, but also came home and then just worked on putting out hay and also just a little bit of work on equipment. Still trying to get some hay equipment for the upcoming season, getting them ready to go. Between those two, that was pretty much those events. That was pretty much my entire weekend.
Yeah, we also put out hay, feeding animals. We've also started 2-a-day checks on our cows and heifers that are calving. We started that at the beginning of this week, so we're getting close enough now that we've decided twice a day is right. Honestly, once we get through all the heifers, we'll probably still do twice a day, but we'll be less stressed about it. But certainly we have some heifers that we have a close eye on, finish calving.
You guys are about within 2 weeks out.
Yeah, we should see the first calves in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
We saw one already, but we already discussed that was a rover. That was a rangy cow that decided she was going to go visit the bulls. The bulls did not visit her. And can't account for all people's personalities. You can't account for all cows having good respect for their fences like they're supposed to. So, but we think some more are coming in the next couple of weeks. There's a couple that look like they're starting to get closer. So got to keep an eye on this.
Okay.
Other than that, we've been trying to prep fuel cans. We're going to do our major fuel purchase here in the next couple weeks. Diesel fuel purchase for the farm, so that's also on the agenda. Maybe we'll get our taxes done, and that'll give us a little bit of money towards fuel. Got to find money somewhere, and that's an option. So,
and I guess also kind of looking at fertilizer prices, but not as high as they were last year. So, I guess just it's that time of year. Any soil sampling done yet, or? Yeah,
we have soil samples done, and actually we have ordered fertilizer.
Okay.
We went ahead and did our order 2 weeks ago. So. I forgot about that. I probably haven't even said that update. But yes, we did order fertilizer. We'll have it applied probably in April.
Okay.
Some people try and do it earlier than that, but I tend to wait because we've applied early before and then had hard frost afterwards, and it feels like the fertilizer on the nitrogen side doesn't do nearly as much if you get a really good kill on that grass after you apply it. I'm sure it still does. It doesn't seem to provide the same jump that you would hope for.
That's a rapid response.
Yeah, so we're going to wait and do that application in April and try and make sure we're after typical last heavy frost.
Okay.
Although it looks really green out there, so that might be a mistake. Maybe we should already have it on there. I'm not sure. So
I think it's supposed to get cold next week. So it's the variable weather.
Yeah.
Really.
It's a typical March.
Yes.
They say in like a lion, out like a lamb, but around here, March could go lion, lamb, about 4 times before you get to the end of the month. So
yeah, there just seem to be some swings. We had one of the swings this past week. I think with we had a high wind event.
Yes, we did. We had a very high wind event on Friday. By Saturday morning, the winds were basically gone. It was pretty much a still air day, and then it got a little bit windier again later in the weekend, which was actually helpful because it dried some things out. But that wind did create some damage A lot of people without power, a lot of people with damage to barns and other structures. We were lucky, minor damage. We have some shingles off of some buildings. It racked one of our doors on one of the barns, one of the barn doors.
Okay.
And took a little bit of tin off of one barn, but in the grand scheme of things, a couple sheets of metal on the roof of one barn and one door getting racked is a pretty small price to pay for the wind that we had.
Yeah, so I think most of it was like, I think they said Bluegrass Airport was maybe 70 mile per hour plus, and I think gust, and I think 50 miles was kind of typical across the state. And we saw ourselves, so I have a couple of goat huts. So the goat huts that were calf hutches, they were just blown across the field. The goat huts, I had metal goat huts that were fairly long, maybe about 16-foot long and little hoops. They were blown against the fence, flipped over. So there was some damage to them, but nothing cosmetic. And then we had some trees down. So I think we're going to discuss that more in depth today. Is like, what do we do with the trees? So a lot of fence lines we had, boundary fences potentially. They were at least 5 that I know of thus far. That were the trees down on the fence.
Yeah, we have trees down in a number of spots, but in the grand scheme of things, I think we were pretty lucky there too. We didn't have significant damage. Had one tree that fell, and it was our new fence, one that we just finished last year, our fixed nut high tensile. It came up and actually it avoided the fence. We did a pretty good job clearing that fence line prior to putting in that fence.
Yep.
So the one that fell the direction we expected it to, away from the fence, but the roots kind of bunched up at the bottom. So we basically just cut it off, knocked it back, and pulled the fence back down and got the dirt out of the fence just to keep that galvanization protected from deterioration with ground contact. We've had trees down on a couple of interior fences, but all of our interiors are smooth wire, electrified, high tensile wire, and those bounced back just fine, the ones that we've taken off. The other ones that we have to do are on pieces of property with older fences, and that will be a little bit more work. So we at least have, if we have to put animals out on pasture in April, the fence fields that they're going to are now open
Okay.
back up, available. But there certainly are still some trees down on some other fences that we have to work on.
Yeah, and ours that were down were in a couple older fences. Nothing has been replaced, and so we had to go through there and just clear those up and just try to redo the wires as much.
I think that's what most people are sort of faced with, how much fence to repair. And then, part of the question is, if you're going in there to repair the fence, do you also want to take some time?
So because we were pretty much doing this as fast as we could, we left the trees there. And so I personally don't burn with wood, but my other brother does, and he was getting a little low. So I was like, well, now he has plenty of wood. A couple years.
Yep. Yeah, we also don't burn with wood. It's only a joke. For those of you that are not familiar, I had a house fire in November, and so
caused by a wood stove being installed incorrectly, the piping.
Yeah, it was an incorrectly built chimney, but currently we're not burning anything. Although, to be fair, we have a lot of wood that we have cut and a lot of wood that we need to burn or do something with. So for the most part, we're willing to still, but we have to figure out what the practical way is to utilize that wood, whether that's going to be us or selling it or doing something. But we have to find a use of that product. Not really willing to cut them up and burn them and waste that material. I have to find.
I know we in the past, so I've been on a big kick at least the past couple of years of just pushing out fence lines. So we pushed out fence lines, and we'll also, as we're pushing out the old fence lines, we'll actually take some of those trees and push them all. And so if they have a lot of wire, barbed wire, whatever it is in them, I'll go ahead and, for the most part, like those trees, I'll salvage what I can on some of them, but I'll try to just go ahead and burn them.
Yep.
Like, let them sit there for 2 years.
Yeah, I think any of the trees that have, like, where the fence has grown into the tree, it's not worth trying to clean that up. That is, I just leave that to nature to do what it needs. you're right. Those get burned. Typically, we actually have a couple areas where we're sort of in sinkholes. They're low spots, but they're not like a giant hole. And we can really burn in them because they're kind of a contained space. So it actually, plus that material helps fill in that. Long term, that's not a good filling in. Short term, that's a way to sort of contain brush piles that you're.
Yeah, and plus it keeps, as long as calves can't get into the sink.
Yep, exactly. So anyway, that's sort of what we do. Our approach has not been to fully clear any fence line so far, although we have one or two that will probably get bulldozed and completely cleared. For the most part, we've been strategic about taking trees out. So our rule of thumb is anything that is like a sapling, less than 2 or 3 inches is gone, of course. Anything that the bush hog or the rotary cutter can take down is gone. Then any tree that is leaning is gone. Any tree with a lot of downward facing limbs, gone. Anything that looks like it could be an ash, you could blink and squint and it might be an ash, is gone. And anything that's what I would call a crappy tree, so anything that looks like it's part of a succession set of trees, like locusts.
Yes.
Anything
Cedars,
that's a soft,
probably.
like a cedar, probably is going to go too. But then anything that we consider a good tree, that hackberries on up. Hackberries are sort of questionable, but if it's tall and straight,
It's a hickory or oak
a
potentially.
hickory or an oak, it's good to leave in that fence line because we need the shade. And to be completely honest, with all the winds and other things we've had, we also want the windbreak. So we want, some of them are spots where we want it for weather protection in the wintertime, but we also want it for shade in the summertime. And we like to have them on a couple different sides of our fields so that we're not having them congregate under 1 or 2 trees, because that's really tough on themselves.
I think so. A lot of the fields where I cleaned up, like took out a lot of the trees, it was just junk cedars, it was junk ashes a lot of times, and so just had them take out most of those. So we had some black walnut, left those there, had some oaks, and generally if a tree is, it's a good tree, and if I can wrap my arms around it, not touch my fingers, I'm leaving that one alone, typically. So I said clean it all out. Typically, if it's a big tree, I'll try to leave. And then we'll also have lines where we have some interior trees in our fields. So where there's sinkholes, where it was a close proximity to the sinkhole, we actually left, whatever tree was growing there, try to leave them for additional shade for our cattle. And sometimes around the streams too, where wasn't quite a riparian area, but we had a forested area.
Yeah, we also have some trees on some intermittent stream banks. We don't have flowing streams, but in areas that tend to stay wetter, we have some trees as well. And we also have some interior trees. But we also have some trees that are older on our interior that are starting to look more poor. And so we're pretty careful that in case they fail, it's hard to get new tree growth in the middle of a pasture. So we do have 1 or 2 fields that we have intentionally left trees in, and then we're protecting the cattle.
Okay.
So we'll use a hay ring or something like that in the summer when they're grazing, try and allow those trees to grow even still grazing that field. So ideally we have a couple more trees inside of the fields that aren't along a fence line. It just is, over time, what tends to happen is because of the foot traffic, because the animals congregate under them, they compact the ground around the soil around those roots. It tends to be an area where we kill trees just by the nature of having all the animals there.
Cattle. Yeah, we do have a couple. So on some of our older farms, we have a couple of tree lines that are just in the fence line. And so it'd be cedars and everything else. The cedars provide good shade and windbreak year round. So for those fields, we do have trees around. So some of them we do have it, but we're trying to get, if we had to redo that fence line today, we'd probably, just for simplicity and ease of putting in your posts and fence line, we'd probably, if it was a cedar or anything, get taken out.
Yeah, it's actually, for anyone who's never had to build a fence, the speed at which you can build it is so much better if you take the trees out.
Yes.
And most, if you're hiring a fence contractor, most of them would require at least some level of clearing. That most of them are not, they do not want to attach their fence, brand new fence, up to trees. It also will void warranties on the fence material, because that class 3 galvanization is designed to heal, but it is not designed to direct contact continually with a tree. Designed to handle wind, electricity, if it's smooth wire. Maybe the way we would connect it to a post is fine, but the post isn't going to grow around it,
Right.
and absorb all that galvanization.
Oh,
So there's a couple reasons. One, because it voids warranties on the fabric of the fence, and two, from a simplicity standpoint, it makes the fence better. Plus, people get really upset when they spend a lot of money on a fence, tell you to leave up the trees, and then the trees fall on the fence because of a weather event like this week. So most times they will avoid attaching it to a tree and avoid doing it if there's a lot of trees. And they'll usually allow for a few decent trees to remain, but they don't like
a lot of.
a lot of trees.
And so, when we have people come and clean up fence lines, we do have some forest areas or some quote forest. So we'll probably, away from the fence line, we'll probably have them clean at least 25 to 30 foot away from the fence line. Get a little buffer around the fence. So, it minimizes what trees get the fence. And then if they're ash trees, it's like, go ahead and if they're then even 35 feet, go ahead and take them out.
Yeah, ash trees are really, you'd think they'd be done falling, but they're not. They just keep coming down. So it is something to pick out trees, identify. We actually cleared one of our fence lines, I guess, while I was on maternity, probably in early November, late October. And then it was very frustrating to go back and check that fence line and find 4 more trees that were down, not on the fence, because we had already cleared anything that was at risk of falling on the fence, but things that we didn't think were at risk of falling when we cleared that fence line that are now down.
So I guess you have to go in there with the grapple bucket and chainsaw. And
Yep. Yeah, so grapple bucket, chainsaw. We usually cut our trees, limb them, take all the brush, and put it in one spot, and then take all the stuff that's limbed that we're going to cut for firewood on a wagon all the way to the front, cut it in the front.
Okay.
Into smaller pieces, because it's easier to pick up with the grapple bucket long, large pieces, them on the wagon, 20 or 20 wagon.
Okay.
Something with bigger float tires, but wetter ground. We didn't actually take anything back this week so far. We've just cut and make sure that the fence is intact. But we'll still have to go back and then rise out a little bit more.
Yeah, I guess we typically, if we have time, we go ahead and cut it up there. For us, we cut it up, then grab with the gravel bucket, just put all the logs into it. So we have the dump trailer. We have the dump trailer, so we throw it on the dump trailer, take it to Joey's pile, and just dump.
Good. Yeah, for us, we also have a splitter up front.
Okay.
A gas-powered splitter, and that is what we used for breaking up the bigger stuff. So that cut to our inch or length fireplace cake split. But it's nice to have one spot to do that. So we sort of let everything here a little bit in one spot, and then we have one big day of splitting. That's sort of how we
had done, I think, gotten some cues for IBC crates from you guys, and we use those for a number of years to stack our wood in. Go out there with our splitter, with our logs, and actually we cut it up and move it with the skid steer that way. Joy's stove is much bigger than Mom's old stove, and so you can just put almost the whole log in.
Yeah. Is that an indoor or is that an outdoor?
It's an outdoor furnace.
The outdoor wood furnace is very interesting. We maybe have to do another conversation about heating options and wood heat and stuff like that. But those outdoor furnaces for people that have a lot of wood the byproduct of storms on their farm. It is really a convenient
Yeah.
option for.
So he puts one in the morning and just lets it rock and roll, and it does a fairly good job.
So I think that's convenient, though. That makes for you guys probably the whole process a lot simpler. That you
use bigger logs, and I had to cut it down as much or split a little less.
Yeah, a little less labor involved.
Yep.
Okay, before we end, I think that's a pretty good summary. Have you done any tree planting, though? That's actually one thing I didn't ask you, because we have actually intentionally planted trees in a couple spots.
We are thinking about doing it. So I've planted a lot of fruit trees. I plant peaches, I plant pear trees. And so just around the property, just to get them producing. I like peaches and pears, so get them producing.
But no cherry trees.
No cherry trees.
Yeah, cherry trees are poisonous to cattle.
But we have thought about some other brother. He's planted some pecan trees, and I guess you have to make sure to plant males and female trees. And so we've thought about Arbor Day. We've had planted a couple other small trees. I don't mind red buds.
Yeah,
and they do seem to do fairly well. Provide decent amount of shade for. I don't mind red buds. And we have a plan to. We'll get there.
Yeah. Been really poplar. We have a little bit of everything. I think it is for me it's a priority, because I think sort of an interesting. We've had a lot of severe weather events, but we're also getting some hotter weather in the summertime, and I consider that part of my plan for adaptable for some more extreme weather events. Have trees. So I don't want trees to land on my fence, but I do want to have trees. So I'm trying to find the right balance with where do I plant the trees and how many trees do I need. Make sure that I have good growth while still having reasonable pastures that I pay if I need. So finding that balance with trees interior versus tree fence line, how many trees, all of that it's a balancing act. But I think it's sort of a love-hate relationship. And currently we're in the hate portion because we're having to cut so much.
Up. Yeah.
But at the same time, when we get to July, if you don't want your animals like in ponds all the time, cutting up their feet and messing in the ponds and making them dirty, better be giving them shade or other options. Comfortable.
Right.
This is one way to do it.
I think the two of the apple trees that I had were on the west side of my house. They seem to both be acting as a windbreak for the house. So I'm definitely thinking about putting some more trees on the westerly side of the house as a wind, because that's where I've lost 2 trees before this past year.
Yeah, and the fruit trees are a little bit more susceptible, especially if they're younger. So
we had just and immediately prior to this wind event, we had 1.5 inches of rain. So a lot of them came up by the.
Right. Okay. I think that's probably a pretty good summary of tree management. Anything to add to that?
That's pretty much it.
Well, before we end, what's on the plan?
So this next week on the farm, so we're doing some probably more equipment maintenance, trying to think about some fertilizer, what we do for fertilizer. We're just thinking about it, not actually applying anything. Strategizing, and then working on taxes coming up here. So nothing crazy, just probably the little. We have our wean calves probably moving the farm where they can get.
Okay. We have our taxes. I am submitting all of the paper copies, our worksheets, and all of that stuff has already been accountant, so that'll be done. Our portion of it by the time I get home this afternoon, as long as I don't forget to drop it off on my way, which is embarrassing. Other than that, we will be working on feeding our rented piece of land where we do some feeding. We are going to get the last of our hay out, knowing that it's going to be cold next week and that potentially we can hay out then. We're just going to be safe and put out a number of rolls while it's dry right now, knowing that we're getting a little bit of rain here at the end of the week as well. So we're trying to make sure that we have enough hay out that we can get till April 1. That way, if we have to go further into the year, we're not all of our hay that was stored on under tarps on the rented land gone.
Okay.
So any hay that we have left at this point will be in a barn, and therefore, depending on how weather goes, will depend on how much more hay we have to feed past April 1. But we will not be hauling any hay until around that April 1.
Okay.
Aside from that, we'll be doing our checks, feeding hay, delivering hay, all the normal.
Time consuming.
Yep. And I'm sure we have some equipment maintenance. We actually took one tractor off last week to have someone else work just because an issue, and they are going to get the repair done for us so that we don't have.
Yep. Yeah.
Thank goodness there are people that are able to do things to help, because otherwise we'd be in trouble.
Up a creek without a paddle.
And with that, I think we'll end the podcast for today, and we'll be back next week. Next week, we have a guest with us.
Yep,
We're going to have Matt Springer come on. And since we're coming into the beginning of calving season, we'll talk about predators and management of predators, especially during calving season.
Tune in, guys.
Thanks.
Have You Heard is a production of the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food and Environment, along with the Department of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering. Discover what's wildly possible at ca.uky.edu.